Lemuel Gulliver, a middle-aged guy, wakes up in his cluttered New York apartment and starts his morning routine. He chats with his superhero toys on the shelf and dances in the shower, giving us a glimpse of his silly side. Gulliver's got a job in the mailroom of a newspaper company in New York. That day, he meets a new employee, Dan, and they become friends. Gulliver is Dan's boss in the mailing department, and together they're out delivering mail for the day. They run into Gulliver's longtime crush, a journalist named Darcy Silverman. He's been in love with her for years but hasn't said a word. Later that day, Dan shares a notice saying he's been promoted to head of the mail department on his first day. Gulliver's been at the facility for 10 years, but nobody really respects him there. Dan says that Gulliver is too scared to speak up and thinks he'll just stay stuck in his mailroom job forever. Gulliver, feeling a bit overwhelmed, heads out of the office and spots Darcy still putting in some late hours. He musters up the courage and heads to her cabin to ask her out. But his nerves take over, so he grabs a random paper from her desk and leaves. Darcy asks him if he's interested in applying for a travel writing assignment. Gulliver, feeling a bit anxious, agrees, and now has to put together a travel blog by tomorrow. At home, he's copying and pasting a bunch of articles from the internet for the blog. The next day at work, he meets with Darcy, who is impressed by his writing skills and gives him a new task. She wants him to head to the Bermuda Triangle and write an article about the legends of ships mysteriously disappearing there to impress her. Gulliver's on board. Darcy sets up a contact and a boat for him. Gulliver heads to Bermuda the next day, and a man picks him up there. He takes Gulliver to a rented boat and shows him how to use it. The journey is quite easy since the boat runs on its own. Gulliver sets off for the Bermuda Triangle, spending the first few hours alone in the boat. He has a good time reading magazines about building robots and sipping on a few cans of Coke. He quickly drifts off to sleep. After a while, he wakes up to see a huge wave right in front of him. A sea storm hits, and he quickly throws on a life jacket. The boat rocks back and forth in the water. Gulliver turns to spot a massive sea tornado heading right for him. Gulliver and his boat get caught up in the tornado, swirling around before being pulled right into its eye. The screen turns black. When Gulliver opens his eyes, he finds he can't move his body. He glances down and is taken aback to find some tiny men standing on his chest. The camera pulls back, revealing a crowd of tiny people gathered around Gulliver. He's stuck on the ground with little ropes and wood. Commander Edward refers to Gulliver as a beast. A bit puzzled, Gulliver yells in fear and breaks free from the ropes, convinced this must be a dream. He gives closing his eyes a shot. Edward tells his soldiers to take the beast down. The soldiers hook onto Gulliver's pants and bring him down, leaving him unconscious. When he wakes up, Gulliver discovers he's tied to a cart and being pulled into the kingdom of Lilipad. The little townsfolk step out of their homes to catch a glimpse of the creature. He gets pulled into the royal palace and is introduced to King Theodore, the king of Lilipad. Princess Mary, the king's daughter, feels sorry for Gulliver and asks Edward if the restraints are really needed. Edward says that Gulliver is a spy from the enemy kingdom. Gulliver finally speaks up and asks the king where he is. King Theodore hears from Secretary Jenks that he is in Liliput, the greatest nation in the world. Gulliver thinks this is a joke and calls out for the imaginary cameraman to reveal himself. In this scene, Gulliver is stuck inside a cave. He meets another prisoner named Horatio, who got a life sentence from Edward for trying to win over Princess Mary. Edward approaches the two again. He listens to them, calling him Lamars. When an angry Edward threatens to imprison them for life, Gulliver says that lame means someone who is brave. Edward, pleased with the answer, takes both prisoners to a field to plow it using Gulliver's strength. He uses a machine to hold Gulliver back. At that moment, the palace bell rings twice, signaling that Blowfish has launched an attack. They're attempting to kidnap Princess Mary and have set a fire at the palace. Edward rushes to the palace and tells everyone not to save the princess because he wants to be the one to rescue her. Horatio asks Gulliver to do it since Edward can't get to her in time. Gulliver takes down the Black Russian soldiers with ease and saves the princess. The king and his secretary are trapped in the fire. Gulliver, in a rush, pees on the building. Everyone cheers for him when he puts out the fire and saves King Theodore. The king lets him and Horatio go from imprisonment and thanks Gulliver for being brave. He invites everyone to a feast that night to celebrate the occasion. Edward is really angry to see someone else getting praised for their bravery at the feast. The king asks Gulliver about his homeland, and Gulliver responds, he's from Manhattan. People think Gulliver was the president of Manhattan because he's the bravest one around. For the first time in his life, Gulliver feels like a hero. He makes up this story, saying he was the president of the awesome. Everybody believes him, but Edward doesn't. The next day, the folks in Lollipop put together a huge home for Gulliver, complete with all the amenities he missed out on back in New York. Gulliver has them build a theater that can accommodate everyone in the kingdom. So, he puts on a drama about the sinking Titanic and says it's the story of his life. People are really struck by the tragic life he's lived. Edward asks how he was saved after drowning, and Gulliver says he was resuscitated. Later on, Horatio asks Gulliver for help to impress Princess Mary, and Gulliver says yes. They head over to the palace, and Horatio walks up to the princess. A hidden Gulliver shares the lyrics of the song Kiss, getting Horatio to repeat them. In the end, the princess begins to have feelings for Horatio, but then Edward shows up to court her. Edward and his partner are meant to be together, especially since he's known as the bravest in the kingdom. Princess Mary doesn't really like Edward, but she just can't seem to shake him off and send him away. The search party discovers the boat that washed ashore, along with some cans of Coke. Gulliver shows up and sees that his phone is still working. He's got 12 voice messages from Darcy. She's really angry to have discovered that Gulliver plagiarized his article. Now she has to sail the same route that Gulliver took to conduct her own research on the Bermuda Triangle. Gulliver doesn't want to head back to New York and deal with her, so he chooses to stay in Lilipad for good. Edward isn't happy about the decision and tells the king he's suspicious of Gulliver. The king lets him go, saying he trusts Gulliver based on what he says. The king names Gulliver the new general and appoints Edward as vice-general. Edward, feeling jealous, switches off the Lilipad's defense system, which makes it easier for their enemies to attack. Black Russia sees this and plans to attack Lilliput right away. They make their way to the kingdom by sea and fire cannonballs at Lilliput, with Lilliput being the general. Now Gulliver has to take charge and stop them. He steps into the water, a bit nervous, and begins to splash it around. The cannonballs just don't have any effect on Gulliver since he's so much bigger than them. In the end, he takes down the bluff and becomes Lilliput's hero. The folks from Lilipad make sure all of Gulliver's wishes come true. They even created a model of Times Square to make him feel at home. They switch up their outfits to look like Gulliver's. Soldiers are assigned to give him haircuts and massages. One night, Edward walks right into the princess's chamber. He says it's his right to come in whenever he wants because he's courting the princess. The princess finally admits that she doesn't love him and doesn't want him to pursue her anymore. Edward, feeling angry, heads off to Bluff, Russia to seek help from their king. Edward's men found the Build Your Robot book that Gulliver had on the boat. The bluffed Russian king decides to help him build a robot with the book to take on Gulliver. A few days later, Gulliver finds himself at the model Times Square when the palace bells start ringing, hinting at an invasion. Gulliver is all set to take on the tiny people, but he's caught off guard when a giant robot controlled by Edward appears right in front of him. Edward calls him out for a duel. Gulliver really has no choice but to go along with it. He gives the robot a shove, but it's way stronger than he is. It grabs Gulliver by his pants and forces him to accept defeat. Gulliver admits that everything he claimed about being the president is a lie. The king and the princess can't believe they've been betrayed by him. Edward sends Gulliver to a forbidden place known as the island, which we avoid as a punishment. So, when Gulliver is just hanging out there, a giant little girl comes along and picks him up. So, it turns out the island is home to giants. The girl sees Gulliver as a toy and puts him in her Barbie house, dressing him up in pink clothes. So, over in Lilliput, Darcy's body ends up on the shore. Gulliver has mentioned to everyone that Darcy is his princess back home, so Edward knows who she is and locks her up. She runs into King Theodore and his queen in the prison, where they've been taken after Gulliver's defeat. Horatio notices this and chooses to head to the island, a place we wouldn't dare go to bring Gulliver back. He's tiny on the island and somehow makes it to Gulliver without a hitch. The little girl's dollhouse has a skeleton of a dead U.S. Air Force pilot, too. Gulliver grabs the parachute to make his escape and heads back to Lilliput. He goes to see Darcy in the prison and admits that he has a crush on her. She lets go of the fact that he plagiarized the article and appears to be getting more comfortable with him. Gulliver has made up his mind to challenge Edward to a duel. He's done with proving his bravery. He just really wants to help Lily now. The next day, they face each other, all set for a showdown. Gulliver wants Edward to return the kingdom to King Theodore if he wins, but if he loses, Edward will completely destroy the kingdom. They start fighting, and Edward takes control in just a few seconds. Horatio rushes in to help and makes it inside the robot. He takes down Edward from within, ultimately powering up the robot. After that, Gulliver easily takes it down, and the crowd goes wild with cheers. Even Darcy is celebrating the win thanks to Horatio's bravery. He's given the go-ahead to court Princess Mary. They finally share a kiss. But at that moment, Edward, who has completely lost his mind, takes the princess hostage. The princess, fed up with Edward, finally decides to beat the traitor up in frustration. Darcy kisses Gulliver for the first time. The Black Russian King and Theodore are getting ready to start the war again, but Gulliver halts them. He helps bring peace between the rival island nations by reciting Edwin Starr's war. Finally, he and Darcy make their way back to New York City on their fixed-up ship a few weeks later. Gulliver has moved on from the mailroom job and is now a travel writer. He and Darcy are in a great relationship. Gulliver just wrapped up a travel assignment. The movie wraps up with the two walking out of Darcy's office, hand in hand,